In today's show, I'm looking at statistical outliers. Yesterday, we talked about year-to-year correlations between numbers. So who are the players who are right up the top of individual stats or players right at the bottom who we might be looking for improvement or regression in those individual statistics? Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. So, yesterday's show, again, we are in the dead portion of the offseason. We're still going to have lots of stuff to come. And even if you don't remember all the details of these shows, getting the base information in here, which is what we're doing now, and just, should I give you an idea of what's coming up? I'll do that later in the week. Getting an idea of these things, just having them in your head is a really good base for understanding fantasy, understanding drafts, understanding trades, understanding moves throughout the season. Yesterday, we talked about the way that individual numbers can correlate year on year. We talked about the ones that are highly correlated. We talked about the ones that are less highly correlated. And that ties into things when we talk about the impact of rankings and how, because things are they're tightly correlated and the numbers can be small or big, that changes in those numbers, whether it's by a half or a 1 or a 1.5, can cause gigantic moves in fantasy ranks. And we get so tied up with this player was 30th or this player was 70th, when in essence the difference might be they had 0.7 extra or fewer rebounds per game. And in the scheme of things, it doesn't matter that much. So when we're talking about the way that the value of players is distributed, it's really important to understand the bell curve-like nature of that. One of the great ways to look at that is go to dunksandthrees.com, and they've got their EPM metric, which is one of the best all-in-one metrics you have. And on the right-hand side of that screen, it shows you all of the players in like a little graph, and how at the top there's the outlier performance, and they sort of sit as single dots, and then it just turns into this big clump of players in the middle. That's very similar to fantasy, where it's the top round or so, then the gaps between the players, it shrinks as you get lower or into the middle range of guys. And then, so any sort of small change, a 2% change in free throws, or a half a steal extra, or they get 1 extra assist per game, it might jump in 50 spots. Because other players are moving down 20, they're moving up 20, and it just changes things, not immeasurably, because we can measure it. It changes things a lot. So what I like to do, and we did this last season, is look at the top performers. What I did here was grab the top 188 players on a per-game basis, according to my rankings from last season, looking at the top 8 in a bunch of different categories, looking at the bottom 8 in a bunch of different categories, comparing what they did in 22-23 versus what they did in 21-22. And having a look what we can make of that. How did they move? What could that mean for the future? Are there guys that could be in line for big jumps forward? That's what we're going to talk about. It is useful. I promise you. I think you're going to enjoy it, Michael Bolton. Not Michael Bolton, Warnie.
Let's get it on, Gilly.
We're going to start by talking about rebounds. And the player who led the NBA in rebounds, and I didn't actually know this. I probably did if you had asked me, but it didn't come to my mind that the league leader in rebounds last season was Anthony Davis. There are reasons for that. He played exclusively at center, his best position. And this is one of those things when we look at production of players. When you play more at center versus power forward, the usual thing that happens is your rebound numbers go up, your block numbers go up, your field goal percentage goes up. When you play at power forward instead of center, your rebounds drop, your field goal percentage drops, your three-point attempt rate usually goes up. Your block rate drops. Those things change. So Davis played more at center. He went from 9.9 rebounds per game to 12.6. And one of the things we talked about in the preseason last year was like, well, I don't know if Davis can ever become that good player again because I don't know if the rebounds are coming back. Well, they did. That was the thing. That's a huge jump. But is he going to bitch and piss and moan again this season? Oh, I need to play with a center. And they're going to go with Jackson Hayes next to him? Because if they are, the rebounds will drop. If he's playing on the perimeter because he's too scared of bumping into people, if that happens, then the rebounds will drop. Be aware of that. Part of Davis's ability to jump up per game was an extra 2.7 rebounds per game. That's a big difference. It's 20% increase. Big difference. Actually more, 25% increase. Actually more, 28% increase. Big jump. Domantas Sabonis, relatively stable. He was 12.3 versus 12.1 the year before that. I don't think we have any real concerns about Sabonis' rebound numbers changing. His position's not changing. His role's the same. Jokic is an interesting one. Haven't played the sound. Let's do it. Big Chungus. He went from 11, he was 13.7, and he went to only 11.8 last season. Now, he was still the number one player in fantasy, in large part because some other numbers got offset as well. But that's interesting. I don't really know what the reason behind that is. Maybe it's a full season of Michael Porter Jr., but that's a decent-sized drop. So does Jokic go back to being almost a 14-rebound player? You'll notice no one even hit 13 rebounds this season. The last season we had 2 of them. Or does he stay at 12? Giannis stayed the same, 11.8 to 11.6. But what about the big fella, Rudy Gobert?
Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert.
This is interesting because when he joined the Timberwolves, we thought that Karl Anthony Towns would take a big hit in rebounds, and he did. And we thought that Gobert might take a small hit in rebounds, but he didn't. He took a big hit, and Towns missed 2/3 of the season. Gobert went from 14.7 rebounds to 11.6. And we talk about the disappointment of Rudy Gobert's season from a real-life perspective, but also from a fantasy perspective. His blocks dropped as well. But that's a big difference. You lose 3 rebounds per game. And there's no real way to look at that and think that, is he going to push back to almost 15 a game? I highly doubt that. With Naz Reid and Karl Anthony Towns, who are going to play, and you assume Towns plays more, I would say that Gobert is more likely to go down than go up. Steven Adams was at 11.5 last season. He was at 10 the year before that. He played a larger role. He played more next to about the same next to Jaren Jackson. No real reason for me to understand why that is the way it is. And Clint Capella went 11.8 to 11.2 last season. Now, Capella, everyone's been hoping this for 3 years. Not hoping. I don't know why people are so quick, man. They just need to start Okongwu. I just don't think they're going to do it. Or they're like, this is the year we get a minute split between Okongwu and a Capella. And as soon as Quinn Snyder took over, Okongwu's minutes went down significantly. Instead of playing 23, he played like 20 or 19. So there's no reason for me to look at Capella's numbers to think they're going to significantly decline. But the other thing we pay attention to is that once you hit 28 years of age, 29, and more explicitly you hit 31, 32, but once you hit 28, 29, declines come. Athletic declines come. Jumping ability might drop 1%. Your speed and reaction time might drop 0.5% when you hit age 29, around that area. And all of that leads to decreases in performance. Now, the more noticeable declines from sub-elite players come around age 31, 32, but you do start to see small declines. So Capella went from 11.8 to 11.2. He's going to be 29 this season. Does he go to 11? Does he go to 10.8? Do they actually split minutes with him in Okongwu? Like, these are the top 8 players in rebounds. And there is concern, I would say, over Davis's number holding, Gobert's number holding, Adams' number holding, and Capella's number might drop as well. And when their value is tied to those, there is chances. Now, rebounds are a highly correlated state year on year. We know this. They are highly correlated. And it was a lower rebound environment in the NBA versus what it was in previous seasons. But there's still some outlier things to look at. Now, on the other side of that, I'm talking about rebounds a lot here because I want to get the idea into your head before we go through the other categories. The low-end rebound players. It's a lot of the same sort of guys that you expect. Colin Sexton averaged 2.2. That was down from 3.3 in those few games he played for Cleveland the year before. Tyus Jones at 2.5 to 2.4. Now, that'll go up because he's going to play more minutes. Schroeder from 3.3 down to 2.5. Anthony Simons was at 2.6 each of the last 2 seasons. Gaz Trent at 2.6 versus 2.7. Malik Monk, 2.6 versus 3.4. So a drop with there because he was playing alongside Sabonis. Really good rebounder. Keegan Murray, solid rebounder. All that's important too, who you play with. And Andrew Nembhard, only 2.7 rebounds. Out of the top 188 players per game, they're your bottom 8 rebounders. And while we can look at those and go, are any of them got hope to improve? Like, I think Dennis Schroeder is one of those ones who might. He could push back to 3.5, 4 rebounds. That's possible. Sexton, I wouldn't anticipate it. Jones probably will. Monk, probably not. Nembhard, probably not. So I think most of those bottom end rebound number players, probably we don't look at those as bounce back sort of guys, I don't think. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 that you can spend betting on the money line. You can spend betting it on over-unders. You can spend betting it on who you think is going to hit the first home run. You can spend betting it on who you think is going to win a division, who's going to win the American League, the National League, the World Series. You can spend betting on NBA futures. It's all there, and you've got those bonus bets that you can use. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. And don't forget to gamble responsibly. I will tell you about what we've got coming up this week or what I've got on the schedule. I don't know what days or when these things are going to come. We're going to do a show on analyzing players in their contract year. Spoiler alert, it doesn't matter. But we're going to talk about that and go through the numbers and go through the performances of players. We're going to talk about how to set up a fantasy league, the settings, and what I did one of these about fixing fantasy settings at the end of the regular season. But I'm going to do one now as we head into the new season. Settings you should use, things we should do. Maybe a discussion on the slightly revamped Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl as well. And I'm probably going to do a show on post-All-Star breakouts. There's going to be a show on injured players heading into the season. There's going to be a Dynasty mock draft coming as well. That's all coming in the next couple of weeks. FanDuel got extra advertising there. Let's look at assist numbers. Who led the league in assists? Well, it was Jimmy Harden. 10.7 versus 10.3 the year before that. Harden's team remains unknown. He has, over the course of his career, transitioned into a full-time point guard, and if he does end up on the Clippers, he will, I imagine, average maybe even higher than that, honestly. With Paul George and Kawhi, he will be a lower usage player, I would guess, versus just Embiid. And his assist numbers will probably rise. 11.5, 12 is not out of the ordinary. Halliburton took a big leap forward. 10.4, up from 8.2 the year before that. He played more minutes, so that's probably the large part of that. I don't really see Halliburton as a huge candidate for regression in that category. They did get better, obviously by bringing in Jarris Walker, trading for Obi Toppin, who's a clear upgrade, even though I don't love Obi Toppin. He's a clear upgrade over Aaron Nesmith and Jordan Nwora. And there's going to be way more alley-oops being able to be thrown by Halliburton, so that helps. A second year of Benedict Mathurin, a man who's allergic to passing but will happily receive them. So I don't really see Halliburton, who took a big step forward, changing much there. We thought there'd be a risk of Trae Young losing assists with DeJounte Murray arriving. That didn't happen. He went from 9.7 to 10.1. He's relatively secure there. And we talked about Jokic losing rebounds. Well, he gained in assists. He just turned more into a facilitator. He went from 7.9 to 9.8. I think 9.8 out of your center is probably too high to rely upon. Now, this doesn't really change anything with Jokic. He's going to be the number one pick. And I don't actually care if he doesn't finish as the number one player. It doesn't matter. You pick him at number one. There's always a chance that he's not number one at the end of the year. Doesn't matter. Who cares? You shouldn't. But expecting 9.8 when in the past he's been a 7.9, 8 sort of player, yeah, I think there's a risk of regression. Chris Paul already regressed from 10.8 to 8.9, and his role's up in the air. I don't think he's playing 32 minutes or 30 minutes or maybe even 29 minutes. I don't think he's going to start. I don't know. I think he's more of a 27-minute-a-night player. And the Warriors are a high-volume assist team, so that'll help. But I think the lack of, or the reduction in playing time probably hurts him there. LaMelo Ball was at 8.4. He was actually 7th in assists per game, despite the limited games and the fact that people think he was a huge disappointment. He was up from 7.6 the year before that. He played tons of minutes. No reason for me to look at that as a regression. But this one is surprising. Ja Morant went from 6.7 to 8.1. Now, obviously, Ja's going to miss the beginning of the season, first 25 games due to suspension. Do we believe that Ja sticks as an 8.1 assist player? I'm a little skeptical of that one, and I don't really have a good reason to be skeptical of it. But I don't look at his situation, his play, and think he's going to always establish as an 8 assist player. Maybe it's 7.4, maybe it's 7.2. I just look at that, and I don't think that we look at Ja as an 8+ guy every year. I don't think so. I don't really have a strong reason for that. But these are the things we look at. We always want to look at the high-end guys, the top-level players, and will they push back? Because that happens quite often. The bottom end, the lowest assist players. Is there any reason to think that any of these guys change? Well, not really. Not really. Because these are centers that just never pass.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Mark Williams averaged 0.4 assists per game. That'll probably rise because he's going to play more minutes. And his teammate, Nick Richards, Big Dick Nick, he went from 0.3 to 0.6. No reason to think any of those guys are going to have larger assist roles. No, actually not true. I think Mark might develop a little bit of passing ability. He's definitely not the level of passer that, say, the cockroach Mason Plumlee was. But there is some room to improve that. Marvin Bagley III, James Wiseman Sr., averaged 0.9 assists. He had 0.8 the year before that. One of the worst passes in the NBA. Is he even going to play? I don't know. Capella went from 1.2 to 0.9 assists. That's sort of what he is. Mitchell Robinson actually doubled, or almost doubled his assist numbers. Went from 0.5 to 0.9, but you know, as a center in a Tom Thibodeau system, you're never going to get the ball. Now, the difference here is that, like, it doesn't take much for Robinson to improve in that category. But as you'll see later, he also dropped in some other categories too. Walker Kessler was at 0.9. Doesn't strike me as a good passer. Could he get to a 1.2, 1.3? Which again isn't much, but it is a change, a significant change in his overall numbers, and it will impact some fantasy ranking stuff if that matters to you. But of course, you're not drafting Walker Kessler to be an assist player. And then the last one is Jaren Jackson, who averaged just 1 assist per game. He was at 1.1 the year before that. That is one I'm monitoring. Without Ja Morant there, and with Marcus Smart in his place to begin the season, will Jaren develop any level of playmaking? Because he can't at the moment. He doesn't do it. Will he be able to play more than 28, 29 minutes a night? Because you push that to 32, you eliminate Ja Morant for 25 games minimum. Maybe Jaren's a 2.4 guy. I wouldn't be shocked that Jaren Jackson, and we'll talk about him again later on, is a regression candidate, but I wouldn't be shocked if Jaren's able to take that significantly higher than what it is here. The next part is where we really start to need to pay more attention, because we talked about the lowest correlated numbers year to year, and it's steals. They're still moderately to strongly correlated, but when you talk rebounds or assists or at 0.89 and then steals are 0.73, it's a big, big difference. So the guys who are at the top of the lists in your steal numbers, for example, last season, DeJounte Murray, 2 steals per game. This season, 1.5. You lose 25% of your steals production, 20 ranking spots are gone immediately. Now, this season was weird because not one player averaged 2 steals per game outside of limited minute legend Big Shaq Harrison.
Big Shaq,
who I think played like 2 games or something for the Lakers. The leader in steals this season was the Jedi, OG Anunoby.
But what about scarves?
OG.
Balenciaga
Stop,
ones.
OG. You better stop, OG.
But as you'll see with these numbers, again, tying into the stuff we did yesterday, he went from 1.5 steals to 1.9 steals. OG Anunoby's value is heavily tied to steals. If he goes from 1.9 and goes back to 1.5, absolutely not outrageous at all. Remember, 0.4 steals per game is 1 steal different, or 1 steal every 2 games. That's all it is. It's 1 play out of 200 possessions. Well, sorry, a regular player plays about 75 possessions a game. It's 1 play out of 150 possessions that you get a steal or you don't. And he might not stick at 1.9. Dylan Wright, if you look at totals numbers, if you look at, not even totals numbers, look at 9-cat value, you'll see Dylan Wright come in at 70. And you go, man, do I draft Dylan Wright? But the answer is no, you don't. But part of the reason is he went from 1.2 steals to 1.8. He's a very good defender. He's a very good steals guy. He's also a very good defender and a very good steals guy the year prior. But he just didn't generate the steals in the same amount. 0.6 is a huge difference. Jimmy Butler went from he was at 1.8 last season, 1.6 the year before that. Fred VanVleet, very similar, 1.8, 1.7. This one is interesting because he was the biggest surprise in fantasy, probably. Close. Maybe it's Lowry. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander jumped right up to be a top 5 player. I put out a hot take, short, reel, TikTok, whatever you want to call it the other day, saying I don't think Shai is going to be a top 5 player this season. I think he's going to get drafted in some, I don't know where because I haven't seen ADPs or anything come out. I think Shai is going to get drafted top 5 in some leagues. But he was able to jump as high as he did by taking a significant leap forward in steals, by taking a significant leap forward in blocks, by taking a significant leap forward in field goal percentage, and taking a significant leap forward in free throw percentage. And he's actually at the absolute outlier levels, top 5, top 6, I said that these are top 8. These are actually top 7 for these categories. Sorry, my bad. He's actually like outlier for 2 of those categories. And if he goes back to, instead of 1.3 steals, he goes like 1.4, 1.5, instead of the 1.7 he got this year, then his value drops. And you tie that in with if his field goals drop off, or if his free throws drop off, or even if his usage falls marginally. Then you're the 12th best player or the 14th best player and not the 5th or 6th. So when your name appears at the top of the outliers, especially for 2 very highly variable categories, well, the most variable categories that we have, it's a little bit red flaggy. And that was part, which if I'm doing a 60-second YouTube short, I can't really get into the reasons why I think that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander might be a bust if you pick him at top 5. He's not a bust. If you pick him at top 5 and he finishes 10th, it's totally fine. But I don't think you'll finish there because he is top 5 in the 2 most highly variable categories year on year in steals and free throw percentage. The wave pool, D'Anthony Melton, 1.6 steals. He was 1.4 the year before that. He is really highly tied to that. Now, of course, if James Harden is traded, you might see Melton's minutes jump up and he's able to maintain this. And then Halliburton was at 1.6. He actually went down. He was 1.7 the year before that. Does the extra offensive responsibility and the variable nature of steals, could that take him from 1.6 down to 1.4? And we already talked about how he was right at the top of assists if he goes to 9.5. Like these are, again, you're appearing at the top of the outlier list in 2 individual categories. The bottom end of steals, these guys are all notoriously low steals guys. I don't expect them to have big value variations here, but there are some interesting ones. Big Dick Nick at 0.2. Okay, cool. But this one was a little bit interesting, I thought.
Jonas Valanciunas.
Now, I was well off on Valanciunas last season because I just didn't know how he would coexist with Zion, and then Zion missed the season, but Valanciunas still stunk. And we do expect more Ingram and more Zion to play this season. And Valanciunas went from 0.6 steals to 0.3 steals, tied in with a bunch of other stuff that went wrong. I don't know where I'm going to have him, but I don't think he's going to be a top 100 player, although those steals could easily redouble. Walker Kessler, we talked about him. It was in the low end of assists already, on the outlier bottom end, and he's here for steals too, 0.4. So we want to talk about Walker Kessler, and we'll talk about him on the positive end really soon, that there's room for him, if you're the bottom end outlier, getting from 0.4 steals to 0.8 steals probably is a 10-spot fantasy jump, and it's not hard to do. If it's a Zubats, 0.4 versus 0.5 the year before that, I don't really expect huge amounts of change, but steals are variable. And this is interesting because after his first season in the NBA, Alf Stewart...
Is that you, Mr. Stewart?
Well, who the hell else do you think it'd be? Get in here, you pair of flaming galahs.
He had a really positive steal rate, which is a great indicator for some future fantasy success. And since then, it's disappeared. Now, they signed him to a contract extension. I don't know why. I think they will start him at power forward. Again, I don't know why. But they could make plenty of mistakes with this rotation because they do it all the time. But Stewart's steal numbers have been bad. 0.3 steals prior year, 0.4 this season. If he's going to hover at under half a game, and again, his rookie season, much better. Can he take that number back up and improve his value? Punch Bob, Bobby Portis, went from 0.7 to 0.4. He's never a big defensive stats guy, but that's a sizable difference. No reason he can't bounce back up to 0.8, 0.7. And Dan Gafford, well, maybe there is, because Portis played a lot more minutes the year before that, because Lopez was injured, so maybe that's part of it. And then Dan Gafford at 0.4, and he was 0.4 the year before that. I think he plays more minutes this season because Porzingis is gone, and their center situation is absolutely dire. So Gafford is going to have to play more minutes if he doesn't go to the locker room every second game with an ankle sprain or get into foul trouble. But at 0.4, one of the lowest players in the top 188 guys in steals, that could easily become 0.7. And that's just a little bit of extra stuff that you get from him. A little bit of extra stuff. Talked about Jaren Jackson. So let's do it now. He averaged 3 blocks a game. Unbelievable. He averaged 2.3 the prior year. And when I went back to look at my video that I did on this last season, the guy that was at the top of the blocks was Miles Turner. Now, Miles Turner's still a top 5 blocks guy. But he went from 2.8 to 2.3. It's a sizable drop. So if Jaren could lead the league in blocks again, but if it's not 3 and it's 2.5, then, and, because they need him to play 33 minutes a night, so his foul trouble has to reduce, that impacts what he is. So if you're going to look at 9-cat fantasy ranks and see Jaren Jackson ranked 11th and think, I'll take him at the turn, it's based on this. It's based on 3 blocks. And if he goes back to 2.3 or 2.5, then he's not making that value back. Nick Claxton went from 1.1 blocks to 2.5. A lot of that is playing time, absolutely. But often, usually, when you increase your playing time, your block rate decreases. So your blocks per 36, your block percentage decreases as your minutes go up. Claxton's didn't. Claxton played more minutes, and his block per minute rate also went up. Not a usual thing. So there is very real regression possibilities there for Nick Claxton, I think, with his block numbers. Brook Lopez was injured the year prior and played limited minutes, but he also more than doubled his block numbers, 1.2 to 2.5. Now, 3-4 years ago, he was averaging 2.2, 2.3 blocks per game for the Bucks. But in the last 2 to 3 seasons, he was very clearly under 2. Lopez came absolutely out of nowhere. I remember getting into an argument with someone said they would rather have drafted Brook Lopez than Giannis last season. Not even to do with the draft position, just Brook Lopez is more valuable. But it's based on this. It's based on doubling one category. And I've got this thing now that I'm more, maybe I'm too focused on it, but I'm focusing on a lot of the way that rankings overvalue players who provide you strong numbers in 2 categories or 3 categories. And then they're bad in the others. And that can overvalue because of the way that blocks in particular are not a normally distributed stat. They're more a right skewed stat, whereas standard deviations and Z-scores usually need to apply on a normal distribution bell curve. And I've got some ways I'm going to try and figure out how to best evaluate that, but it does tend to elevate the players who are high in this category. Anthony Davis went from 2.3 to 2.1. That's interesting. I didn't expect he to drop. Mitchie Robinson stayed the same, 1.8 to 1.8, and Embiid went from 1.5 to 1.7. Embiid was the number 2 fantasy player all season. If he goes back to 1.5, is that enough to drop him down, especially if he sort of takes a step back in his all-out quest for MVP? Does he go back to the 5th best player? Distinctly possible. We always look at the outliers and go, is there room for regression here? One of those ones I'd say, well, maybe Miles Turner actually goes back to 2.6, but Embiid could drop, Lopez very easily, Claxton, and of course, when he's got a 3 block per game outlier, your expectation has to be that he's much lower than that. On the bottom end of blocks, these are just guys who never do it. Tyus Jones was at 0.1, Trae Young was at 0.1, the pencil Harrison Barnes. Barnesy! 0.1. He is the worst shot blocking forward that I've ever seen. Actually, Bojan Bogdanovic is there. Barnes is a power forward and just blocks 5 shots a year. He just doesn't block anything, and that's not changing. Colin Sexton at 0.1, Garland 0.1, Trae Jones 0.1, and TJ McConnell actually went from 0.4 blocks to 0.1. Now, he's not a huge impact player, and I don't even know if he's going to get minutes this season, to be honest. With Hield, Mathurin, Nampard, Halliburton, when does TJ even play? But his block numbers did drop off pretty significantly. But I don't look at any of those guys and go, hey, well, you're going to have a big jump. But it doesn't take much when you're never blocking any shots. Let's look at field goal percentage. I looked at, again, the top 188 fantasy players. Who was the top field goal percentage player? And it was the Rock DJ, Robbie Williams. So why do people think that Rob Williams had such a disappointing season? Well, A, he was injured. B, his minutes were down. C, his block rate was down. And D, his usage rate was down. Is that an injury-related thing? Is that a sneaky Joe Mazzulla thing? Because his efficiency was fine. It actually improved. But I'm always going to be skeptical of 70+% shooters maintaining that. I'm always going to be skeptical of it. And you've got some examples on this screen of why. Dan Gafford was at 69 the year before that. He went up to 73. With maybe some extra minutes and maybe some extra offensive attention. Do we expect 70? Not really. Walker Kessler, 72% from the field. If he gets a few extra touches and plays a few extra minutes, again, is he a 68% guy? Still an awesome number. But it impacts your overall, it impacts your impact. Nicky Claxton talked about his blocks jumping up. He also increased his field goals from 67 to almost 71. 3 percentage point increase. Can he maintain it at 70 or is he a 66% guy? Do they let him explore a little bit more and do a little bit more with the ball? Because he can dribble a little bit. He can take the ball up. He can drive somewhat. It doesn't take much for a big man to lose a little bit in field goal percentage. Mason Plumlee, the cockroach, went from 64 to 68. He's probably going to be playing 21 minutes a night for the Clippers behind Zubats. But no reason that he stays at 68. And then the guy who led the league in field goals last season was, in fact, Mitch Robinson.
And Mitch Robinson says, take it from here?
And he went from 76, an unbelievably high number, down to 67, also an unbelievably high number. But it's a big drop. And that's the sort of thing we worry about with these high players. And the same with, did I even play the sound before? I don't even know. I don't think I'll do it again. I think I did it before. Rudy Gobert, he went from 71 down to 66. 66, still really good. 71's very hard to get to. And that impacted his overall production. On the flip side, who are the bad field goal percentage players? Any of these with hopes to improve? Well, number one was Killian Hayes. He actually dropped from 38.3 to 37.7. It's unfathomable he can be that bad. I don't even think he's going to play this season too much, to be honest. But Royce O'Neal went from 46 to 39. That was inexplicable. It doesn't make any sense why Royce's field goal percentage dropped that much. I think he bounces back relatively significantly. Not that he's good, but it bounces back. Midwest, Dylan Brooks.
No, my son is also named Bort.
He went from 40 to 39. Fred VanVleet went from 40 to 39. So they're just bad shooters. Is there any reason to suggest that Fred VanVleet's shooting percentage jumps in Houston? Not really, but also, again, we are looking at outliers. So outliers often can take steps forward or big steps back. And maybe that is VanVleet. Oladipo went from 48 to 40. Well, he's going to miss most of this season. I don't even think he's going to be on a roster, to be honest. He's currently on the Thunder, but I think they're going to cut him. And I think his career might be done. Unfortunately. Jabari Smith Jr.
Smitty.
41% from the field as a rookie. I will be absolutely shocked if he stays that low. If he is the sixth worst player in the fantasy standard league player pool in field goal percentage, just raw numbers, not weighted numbers, I will be stunned. If he jumped to 46, it's way more likely that he's at 46 than he's at 41 again, I think. And LaMelo Ball went from 43 to 41. Again, as that low of a number, is LaMelo Ball a good shooter? Not really. But can LaMelo Ball jump to 44, 45%? Probably, yeah. So we can expect some improvement, I think. Let's look at free throw percentage because like steals, year-on-year free throw percentage is the most variable fantasy category. And this is important, I think, to look at. Because the guy that was number one in free throw percentage last season was Tyler Hero.
Everyone has a hero.
True.
0 people shouldn't have a hero.
He was at 93%. Now, he was like a 96% shooter in college. He's a very good free throw shooter. But maintaining 93 is really quite difficult. He went from 93 up from 87. 6 percentage point jump. It's huge. So again, he can be awesome and be an 88% guy, but that's a change. Now, Durant was second here, 92 versus 91 the year before that. Curry, 92 and 92. Awesome shooters. But that doesn't mean that they stay at 90 plus. Durant might come in at 89 and Steph might come in at 90 next season. Lose 2-3 percentage points. And it impacts. Lillard went from 88 to 91. Trey Murphy went from 88 to 91. But the big one that stands out is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander went from 81 to 91. 10 percentage point jump. Maybe Shai is an excellent free throw shooter. He is. He did it for a whole season. But he also didn't do it for a whole season before that, or before that, or before that. And if Shai goes from 91 to 86, and we talked about his steals already jumping and his blocks and his field goal percentage, if all of those just drop back 5%, 10%, not even percentage points, like if 91 becomes 87, then those numbers don't sustain. And Grayson Allen went from 87 to 91. So we had a bunch of 90% free throw shooters. They might be the top again, but they might be at 88 or 87, and someone else comes up to be a 90% guy. And on the bottom end of things, with free throw shooters, they can be 20, 15, 20 percentage point jumps. Steven Adams was at 54 the previous season, 36 last season. It's almost 20 percentage points. Now, when you look at ranking numbers, Steven Adams is so far down because of this. Now, obviously, if you have him, you know that you're punting free throws, and you have to take that into consideration when valuing a player. But if he goes back to being a still terrible 54% shooter, his overall rank number looks a lot better. Ben Simmons was at 44% last season. I do not know what to expect out of Ben Simmons, but he's had years of being a 60% guy. Mitchie Robinson, well, he's 48 both last 2 years, but why couldn't he be 57? Walker Kessler, another name. Again, we talked about him a lot. He's 52% last season. Jump that to 58. Jump it to 61. It's still bad, but it's a big difference. Nick Claxton went from 58 down to 54, actually. So while we talked about a couple of things with Claxton maybe regressing, maybe he pushes to be a 61% free throw player. It's not outrageous. Clint Capella went from 47 to 59. Capella's free throw percentage is all over the place year on year. It's very hard to rely upon, and the main thing you know is that you're punting with him, but it does impact overall production and overall valuation of his numbers. And then Jakob Poeltl went from 49.5 to 59. Still bad, but going from one of the worst guys to not as bad is interesting. And you'll notice here, out of the qualifying players, we only had 3 guys under 50%. Adams, Simmons, and Mitchie Robinson. Some big variances in 3-point percentage. Al Horford went from 34% to 45%. Malcolm Brogdon, his teammate, went from 31 to 44. I am not relying upon anybody outside of, say, Seth Curry, maybe even Joe Harris, to be 42, 43% 3-point shooters. Could Al be a 39 guy? Could Brogdon be 40? Absolutely. But those outlier numbers are insane. TJ McConnell went from 30 to 44. Yes, volume was low for him, but we can't rely upon that. Tyrese Maxey, very interesting, went from 42.7 to 43.4. I thought he was at a real risk of regressing, and he did regress early in the season, then he just caught back up. So is he a consistent 43% three-point shooter? I think that if Harden goes, that number is going to drop. But I was also wrong on that last season. I thought that his three-point numbers would drop off, and they didn't. But it's always very, very hard to project a player to be a 43, 44% three-point shooter. Steph was 43%. Steph's awesome. But he shot 38 the year before that. Now, I think you feel more confident projecting Steph to be a 42% guy than a 38% guy, but he's older, and there is variance in this number. So could he be 41, 40? Buddy Hield went from 37 to 43. We know Buddy Hield's an elite shooter, but he shot 37% the year before that. Could someone like a Max Strus, who was at 35% for the Heat, could he push back to be a 40% guy? Changes can happen. And KCP went from 39% with the Wizards up to 42% with the Nuggets. Yeah, some of that is Jokic helping, but some of it is also just year-on-year variance. On the back end of things with 3-point percentage, the lower guys, these are the guys who took at least 1 attempt per game. Evan Mobley went down from 25 to 22%. That's yuck. Can Mobley get to be a 30% guy? That's the hope. Dennis Smith went from 22 to 22, so no change really. Anthony Davis went from 19% to 25, so still terrible, but improved. Bol 26.5%. He was at 25 the year before that. Giannis went from 29 to 27.5. Cade was at 31 as a rookie, 28 as a second-year player. Admittedly, 11-game sample. I think there's big room for that to improve. And Killian Hayes went from 26 to 28. So an improvement, but yeah, that's bad. And then let's look at usage. Who were the big climbers and big drops? Giannis went from 34 to 38 usage. A lot of that is the absence of Chris Middleton for most of the season. So when we're looking at Giannis's numbers, bear that in mind. Joel Embiid went from 36 to 37 usage. I think that probably holds. Luka Doncic from 38 down to 36. And now he has a whole season of Kyrie Irving. So when I did that hot take video from the pool, and I said I don't know if Luka, who will get drafted in the top 5 almost definitely, has really any chance of getting there, it's because I think that usage might sort of drop a little bit more again. Ja Morant went from 34 to 35 usage. That can probably hold. Lillard went from 29 to 33. Well, if he goes to Miami, then I don't think that 33 usage will stick. LeBron went from 32 to 31, so not a big change there. And Tatum went from 31 to 33. And I would expect that Tatum's usage probably falls a little bit back to more the 31.5 versus high 32s. And we look at the low usage players. Mitchie Robinson actually dropped from 11% to 10%. Looney from 12 to 10. Caruso from 13 to 11.5. Larry Nance from 13 to 12. Rob Williams, 11 to 11.8. Al Horford from 15 to 12. 15 to 12. And with Porzingis now there, replacing Marcus Smart. And is this a sneaky Joe Mazzulla thing where Horford and Williams are very low usage players? Maybe we don't expect bounce backs from them. And Torrey Craig went from 15 down to 12%. And now he's in Chicago. He might be able to get high usage in Chicago, but probably not because Levine, DeRozan, and Vooch are getting all those shots. I hope that helped you guys somewhat. Just have a look at who the top and bottom players were in each category and sort of understand what the outlier numbers are. Follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. And if you are here on YouTube, thumb it up and leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.